family, can I talk to you for a moment? Because I feel in my spirit that some of you walked in here carrying a version of yourself that God has been trying to retire for years. You've been holding on to an old identity, an old mindset, an old story that no longer matches the woman or the man you're becoming. And the crazy thing is, you know it. You can feel the stretch. You can feel the pull. You can feel God whispering, it's time to outgrow this. But growth isn't polite. It doesn't always wait for you to feel ready. Sometimes God will push you into seasons where you have to force yourself to evolve, even when your fear is louder than your faith. Sometimes you've got to look at the outdated version of you, the one built from wounds, from survival, from insecurity, and say, thank you, but you can't come with me. There is a future calling your name, and it refuses to negotiate with who you used to be. You can't carry old patterns into new promises. You can't drag old pain into fresh purpose. And you cannot step into destiny wearing the identity of a person who was only meant to exist in your past. So today, I'm inviting you, no, I'm challenging you. It's time to force yourself to outgrow the version of you that God has already outgrown. Because the next level isn't waiting for your comfort. It's waiting for your decision. Outgrowing your old self requires intentional discomfort and a willingness to release identities that no longer align with your growth. And if we're being honest, this is one of the hardest assignments you will ever give yourself, because growing isn't just about becoming more. It's about letting go of what has felt familiar, safe, predictable, or even comforting for years. We talk a lot about elevation, about transformation, about purpose, but we rarely talk about the grief that comes with shedding the parts of you that once protected you. We don't talk about the emotional tug of war that happens when you know better, but you're still tempted to slip back into the versions of yourself that felt easier to operate from. Outgrowing your old self isn't a pretty process. It's not as glamorous as the world makes it look. It is gritty, disruptive, emotional, and uncomfortable because it requires you to confront the truth about who you've been and who you're becoming at the same time. When you make the decision to evolve, something inside you begins to shift, and suddenly the behaviors and patterns that were once automatic start to feel heavy. You begin noticing how often you shrink yourself in conversations just to keep the peace. You begin noticing how often you say yes to things that drain you because you're afraid of disappointing people. You begin noticing how often you silence your own needs because the older version of you learned to survive by staying small. But survival mode you and purpose-filled you cannot coexist. They speak two different languages. They live by two different sets of rules. They are fueled by two different sources of strength. And at some point, you have to decide which one you're willing to honor. Outgrowing your old self is not about rejecting who you've been. It's about recognizing that you were never meant to stay there. Every season of your life was designed with intention, and even the version of you that you've outgrown had value. That version carried you. That version protected you. That version kept you functional when your environment was chaotic and your heart was bruised. But that version was built for survival, not expansion. That version was shaped by wounds, but your future is shaped by wisdom. That version was directed by fear, but your next level is directed by faith. As long as you remain attached to the outdated version of yourself, you remain attached to the limitations that version carried, and you can't walk into a bigger life while holding on to smaller thinking. There comes a moment in every person's life when the discomfort of staying the same becomes more painful than the fear of changing. It's the moment when you recognize that staying where you are requires you to betray who you're meant to be. It's the moment when you realize that repeating the same patterns, entertaining the same relationships, nurturing the same excuses is only delaying your destiny. You start feeling restless in rooms where you used to feel comfortable. You start feeling like a stranger in conversations that once made you feel included. You feel the misalignment, the mismatch, the spiritual friction that tells you you've outgrown your old identity. And you can't go back without shrinking something sacred inside you. But outgrowing your old self doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen because you want it. It doesn't happen because you prayed for it. It doesn't happen because you dreamed about it. It requires intentional discomfort. It requires making decisions that don't feel natural yet. It requires showing up differently even when your emotions haven't caught up. It requires disciplining your reactions, your mindset, your impulses, your words, and your boundaries. Growth is an act of discipline long before it becomes a lifestyle. You have to train yourself to think differently, respond differently, believe differently, and choose differently. Your old self won't just walk away quietly. It will try to cling to you. It will whisper familiar lies. It will remind you of your past failures. It will tempt you with old coping mechanisms. It will try to convince you that change is too hard, too risky, too uncertain. But just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's your future. If you really want to grow, you have to be willing to dismantle the emotional attachments that have kept you tied to your old identity. Those attachments might be relationships, habits, environments, routines, or narratives you've told yourself for years. Some of them were built from trauma. Some were built from rejection. Some were built from trying to fit in. Some were built from not knowing your worth. But as you grow, you begin realizing that everything that shaped you wasn't meant to stay with you. You can honor your past without allowing it to dictate your destiny. You can love who you were without letting that version lead your future. Every level of your life will require a different level of mindset. And part of outgrowing your old self means telling the truth about the ways you've been standing in your own way. Sometimes what holds you back isn't weakness, it's loyalty. Loyalty to old environments, loyalty to old cycles, loyalty to old expectations, loyalty to the image people have of you, loyalty to the role you've played in someone else's story. But loyalty becomes bondage when it costs you your becoming. And there will be moments where God challenges you to choose between who you've been and who he's creating you to be. He will let certain doors close, not because you're being rejected, but because you've outgrown the hallway. He will let certain relationships fade, not because they were bad, but because they cannot nurture where you're going. He will let certain opportunities dry up, not because you failed, but because your assignment has shifted. When growth calls you, stagnation no longer feels like safety. It feels like suffocation. As you evolve, you will also begin to notice resistance, not just externally, but internally. Because your mind has been rehearsing the same stories for years, and those stories have shaped your identity. The story that says you're not good enough. The story that says you always mess things up. The story that says you're too much or not enough. The story that says people always leave you. The story that says you're always the one who has to settle. Those stories have been running your life. But they were written by the version of you that didn't know who they could become. And you cannot build a transformed life on top of a broken narrative. Growing requires rewriting the script. It requires giving yourself permission to change the story mid-sentence, mid-chapter, mid-like. You don't owe your old self consistency. You don't owe anyone else consistency with your old patterns either. You only owe yourself obedience to where you're being called. And sometimes obedience looks like closing doors gently but firmly. Sometimes obedience looks like saying no without explaining yourself. Sometimes obedience looks like starting again with shaky hands but a steady heart. Sometimes obedience looks like stepping into rooms you don't feel prepared for yet, because you know God wouldn't bring you there if you didn't belong. Outgrowing your old self means understanding that you are allowed to evolve without permission from the people who benefited from your past limitations. It means understanding that not everyone will clap for your growth. Some people were only comfortable with you because your old version made them feel superior, needed, or in control. When you begin to grow, those dynamics shift. They may call you different. They may say you've changed, but the truth is, that's the point. And you can't dim your growth to maintain someone else's comfort. Your journey is too important, your calling too significant, your purpose too weighty to stay trapped in an identity that can't carry where God is taking you. This journey requires resilience. It requires patience with yourself. It requires grace for the days when you slip back into old patterns, because growth is not linear. It's layered, it's gradual, it's intentional. Some days you'll feel unstoppable. Other days you'll feel uncertain, but the work is still working. The stretching is still shaping you. The discomfort is still maturing you. Every step you take away from who you were is a step closer to who you are becoming. When you finally allow yourself to outgrow the old version of you, you begin to realize that the person you were clinging to was never the full expression of who you were meant to be. They were a chapter, not the entire story. And the more you lean into growth, the more you discover that you are capable of more than you ever believed. More strength, more clarity, more courage, more wisdom, more resilience, more purpose than your old self ever imagined possible. Your next level cannot be accessed with old habits, old fears, or old patterns of thinking. And this truth is something many people wrestle with more than they admit. We say we want transformation, but we often try to step into a new season while dragging mindsets that were shaped by wounds, disappointments, and cycles we've outgrown. The next level requires a renewed version of you, one that thinks higher, moves wiser, and responds differently. But the reality is, everything in you that was built on survival will resist that transformation at first. Your old habits will cling to you because they've been your comfort. Your old fears will try to pull you backward because they've been your familiar. Your old patterns of thinking will echo old narratives because they've been your default. But you cannot elevate while holding on to what kept you grounded in the place you're trying to leave. Stepping into the next level means confronting the parts of yourself you've normalized for so long that you've stopped questioning them. It's the procrastination you've justified. It's the insecurity you've learned to accommodate. It's the defensive reactions you've labeled as personality when they're really protection. It's the self-sabotage you call not being ready when it's really fear of responsibility. These old patterns become anchors disguised as habits, and they quietly prevent you from rising to levels you were fully capable of reaching. As long as you keep operating from an outdated mindset, your life will keep repeating outdated results. Change will always require you to disrupt the comfort of what no longer serves you. Your next level is not waiting for everything around you to change. It's waiting for you to change. And that begins with acknowledging that the mindset that helped you survive has reached its expiration date. The habits that allowed you to cope are no longer compatible with the version of yourself you're becoming. The fears that once kept you safe are now keeping you stuck. The thoughts you've recycled for years have shaped your expectations, your decisions, your relationships, and your self-perception. And if your thoughts don't change, your life cannot transform. You cannot receive new breakthroughs while clinging to old belief systems. You cannot walk into new territory with a mentality shaped by old battles. The mental patterns that kept you small cannot guide you into a season designed to stretch you. Your next level requires discipline, but more importantly, it requires honesty. You can't elevate if you continue to justify what you should be challenging. You can't stay attached to excuses that have outlived their purpose. You can't keep explaining away the habits that block your progress. Growth begins when you stop defending the parts of you that no longer align with who you're supposed to be. It's easy to talk about transformation, but real transformation asks you to examine the blind spots, the old behaviors, the grudges, the illusions, and the internal narratives that shape your daily choices. You don't rise by accident. You rise by intention. And intention requires awareness. Your next level will also test your willingness to unlearn. We talk a lot about learning new skills, gaining new knowledge, reading new books, listening to new sermons, seeking new strategies. But unlearning is just as important. You have to unlearn the thoughts that told you you're not enough. You have to unlearn the lies that said your past limits your future. You have to unlearn the belief that you are unworthy of abundance, love, stability, or success. You have to unlearn the internal script that taught you to expect disappointment so you wouldn't get hurt. You have to unlearn the habits that made you survive but never allowed you to thrive. Your next level requires you to clear mental space for a new version of you to breathe. Old fears cannot accompany you into a future built on faith. Fear will always try to keep you tied to the familiar because the familiar feels safe, even when it's damaging. Fear whispers the worst case scenario. Fear magnifies your weaknesses. Fear tells you the risk is too big. Fear convinces you that failure is inevitable. But fear is not a compass. Fear is a cage. And the next level demands that you step out of that cage even when your hands are trembling. You don't have to feel ready to grow. You just have to be willing. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward despite it. And every time you push through fear, you weaken its power over your life. Old habits are another barrier to elevation. Habits shape your reality more than inspiration, motivation, or desire ever will. You can dream about the next level, talk about it, pray about it, and plan for it. But if your habits don't support it, you will circle the same mountain again and again. The habits that lead to progress rarely feel comfortable at first. The discipline to wake up earlier, the courage to set boundaries, the focus to stay committed, the honesty to do the internal work, the consistency to show up even on days when you don't feel like it. These habits reshape your identity from the inside out. Your next level is not unlocked by dreaming. It's unlocked by daily decisions that align with the person you're becoming rather than the person you've been. Old patterns of thinking will also test you because they show up unconsciously. They show up in how you interpret events. They show up in how you respond to challenges. They show up in how you view yourself. They show up in the stories you automatically tell yourself when something goes wrong. If you're used to thinking from a place of scarcity, you will talk yourself out of abundance. If you're used to thinking from a place of unworthiness, you will push away opportunities. If you're used to thinking from a place of abandonment, you will sabotage relationships. The mind is powerful, so powerful that it can build a prison without bars. But it can also build a future full of possibility. You decide which direction you let your thoughts carry you. Your next level will stretch your capacity. It will require you to operate in rooms you once thought were too big for you. It will challenge you to trust yourself in ways you've never had to. It will force you to learn skills you avoided. It will push you to speak up when your old self would have stayed silent. It will invite you to take risks that your old fears would have rejected instantly. But you can't embrace the next level if you're still asking your old self for permission. And many people don't rise because they wait for a version of themselves that no longer exists to give them approval. They wait for confidence instead of building it. They wait for clarity instead of stepping into it. They wait for assurance instead of trusting the process. The next level reveals itself when you move, not when you wait. Part of rising means letting go of the environments that triggered your old habits. You cannot heal where you were harmed. You cannot grow in soil that stunts you. You cannot become a new version of yourself around people who only recognize the old version. Some spaces are too small for your next level. Some relationships are too draining for your next season. Some conversations are too limiting for your new mindset. If you don't intentionally create distance from what keeps you stagnant, you unintentionally sabotage your elevation. Elevation requires alignment. And alignment requires knowing what no longer fits the version of yourself you're becoming. Your next level also requires emotional maturity. You cannot continue reacting from the same wounds while expecting a different life. Maturity demands that you question your triggers, examine your judgments, and challenge the emotional autopilot responses you've normalized. Many people want elevation but do not want accountability. They want transformation but resist self-awareness. They want growth but refuse reflection. But you cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. And emotional maturity is one of the most powerful tools you can carry into your next level because it keeps you grounded, consistent, and aligned even when life challenges you. Another requirement for the next level is the ability to handle discomfort with purpose instead of panic. Old patterns make you believe that discomfort is danger, so you retreat. New patterns teach you that discomfort is development, so you persist. Discomfort becomes the bridge between who you are now and who you're capable of becoming. Every time you resist the urge to fall back into old habits, you strengthen the version of yourself that belongs to the next level. Every time you push through fear instead of surrendering to it, you expand your capacity. Every time you choose discipline over impulse, you build the character that can sustain your elevation. The next level isn't just about reaching new heights. It's about becoming the version of yourself that can remain there without collapsing under the weight of it. Ultimately, your next level is waiting for you to release the things that once felt like protection, but now feel like limitation. You are not who you were last year. You are not who you were last season. You are evolving, expanding, learning, healing, and rising. But to fully step into the person you're becoming, you have to stop negotiating with the patterns that belong to who you used to be. The next level is not distant. It's not unreachable. It's not impossible. It's simply unavailable to the version of you that refuses to grow. Transformation begins when you decide that the old version of you is no longer the one who gets to make your decisions, shape your thoughts, or write your future. Transformation demands courage, discipline, and the humility to let God reshape the parts of you that survival once created. And this truth becomes clearer the moment you decide to confront the version of yourself you've been carrying for far too long. Transformation isn't a soft journey. It's not gentle, predictable, or neatly mapped out. It's gritty and holy at the same time. It requires you to stand in front of the mirror and tell the truth about who you've been while holding faith for who you're becoming. It requires you to surrender the identity you constructed during seasons of pain, rejection, fear, and uncertainty. It requires you to admit that some of the parts you've been protecting were never meant to be permanent. They were meant to get you through, not get you to the next level. Courage is the first doorway into true transformation because without courage, you will always choose the comfort of your old self over the unfamiliarity of growth. Courage doesn't mean you don't feel fear. Courage means you choose to move anyway. It means you're willing to let God expose what has been hidden, challenge what has been normalized, and uproot what has been growing in the shadows of your heart. Courage means you stop settling for the lesser version of yourself because you finally believe that you are worthy of more. It means you get honest about the excuses you've wrapped in logic, the patterns you've disguised as personality, and the wounds you've labeled as identity. Courage asks you to stand in the tension between who you were and who you're called to become, and refuse to run back to what's familiar just because it's easier. Transformation demands discipline because courage will get you started, but discipline will keep you going. Inspiration may open the door, but discipline is what carries you across the threshold. Discipline means choosing consistency over convenience, purpose over impulse, healing over avoidance, growth over comfort. It means making decisions your old self wouldn't understand. It means waking up on days you feel discouraged and still choosing to show up for yourself. Discipline builds the structure that transformation needs to thrive. Without it, you return to patterns that sabotage the very change you prayed for. Discipline is not punishment. It is preparation. It strengthens the muscles of your mind, your spirit, and your habits so that you can sustain the weight of the new season you're stepping into. But transformation also requires something many people overlook: humility. Humility is the willingness to admit that you don't know everything, can't control everything, and cannot heal yourself by yourself. Humility invites God into the places you've tried to manage alone. It asks you to surrender the pieces of yourself that you thought were fixed. It allows you to say, Lord, I don't have this part figured out. I don't know how to release this pain. I don't know how to break this habit. I don't know how to think differently. I don't know how to trust again, but I'm willing to be reshaped. Humility opens your heart to divine correction. It softens the pride that keeps you repeating the same cycles. It acknowledges that some of the parts of you that feel permanent were actually built in moments of survival, not identity. The parts of you that survival created were powerful in their season. They helped you endure heartbreak.